Hello and welcome to the Holy Rivals Show. I'm your host, Nathan Bomber Brown. I've got the Wild Ute with me. How you
Hey,
doing, Ute?
hey, how you doing?
Good. How was your weekend?
Well, really well, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. And then we've got JT here. Let me bring him up so you can see him. He's at Locked On Utes. Why don't you give us a little bit about your show?
So yeah, Locked On Utes. We're there Monday through Friday, 30-minute podcast, basically, mostly Utah football focused, but we try to hit on everything Utah athletics related. So a lot of Utah football talk over there, Monday through Friday. Basically, you guys can find me at social media at JT Wistrcill or on Locked On Utes. Love interacting with anyone on the comments as well. Excited to be on with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. We'd like to make this a regular deal. I'm not sure what your schedule is normally like, but I already do one show with my Mafia with Oklahoma State locked on. So, and we've done some work with the Buffs as well.
Yeah.
So we can talk about a schedule, but man, I want to get as much exposure for you guys as we can get, because it helps all of us, right?
Yeah, it absolutely does. You're 100% right.
Do you want to say anything before I sort of jump in here?
Yeah, it seems like there's some big news brewing here with the CU meeting that's been scheduled for Wednesday. And
Exactly
we're going
right.
to talk about that. We're going to hit realignment heavy today. That's going to be really where the discussion point's going. I think it'd be really interesting for folks too to hear the conversation between, especially two Ute fans and folks that really know the program pretty well.
Right.
And JT, from what I understand, he has a point of view that's slightly different than mine. And I was hoping that we can just talk about that, kind of just lay it all out there and stuff and just see really what's best for the Utes here, right?
100% agree.
Let's go down that path. Yeah.
Yeah. And really quick shout out, and I'll post this in our comments. We have so many people following us now and so much interaction. It's tough to get to your comments. If you do want to make sure your comment is read, you can leave a tip. Just leave a tip next to the comment. It's highlighted to me, and we'll make sure we bring it up in the show. I've posted that information in comments already, and if you have any other questions, we'll try to track that. But usually it's the tips that are highlighted. It's not so much about needing the money; it's the priority for the listeners.
Yeah, we're
And
going to
I
give you
think
that
that's
inside
important.
perspective, but your comments are extremely valuable. We want to hear them.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump right in. So I hope you can see this. I'm sharing my screen, but this is the agenda for the newly announced Colorado Buffalo Board of Regents meeting tomorrow. And the key highlight on it is where it says legal advice on a specific matter, athletics matter at CU Boulder. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of these before.
Right.
This isn't the first go around. But I think the language in this specific agenda item is a little bit ominous, and it mirrors the agenda item, the language at least of when the Buffs actually left the Big 12 for the Pac too. So that was a talking point today amongst folks, and so there could be something here. This is something that we definitely need to discuss and stuff. It looks like this is kind of some smoke, realignment smoke to me. Yeah, what do you think, JT?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, like you said, there's definitely a chance because they are keeping it so coy. And what's the old saying? Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So it's gonna be really interesting to see. Realignment in general is so fascinating, right? Everything that kind of goes into it and everything. And as you guys mentioned, I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on the whole topic too. But I mean, I see the pros and cons for Colorado. So I think it does make a lot of sense if they do decide that this is the move they want to make right now. It would be interesting as they would be kind of the first, for what was it it kind of felt like during the spring, I'll say, where we heard all those rumors about all the corner schools
right
end up kind of coming over. So they would kind of be the first domino to fall. So that's where it would be interesting to then, does it affect Utah? Do we see Utah go? Do we see both Arizona schools go? And obviously if that happens, then the Pac-12 would really fall apart. And it's curious because we did hear that Oregon and Washington both wanted to go to the Big Ten and follow USC and UCLA, but they were denied the opportunity. At least right now, I do think they're going to get in eventually. I think it's more so the Big Ten is just trying to test this out and see how this whole process is going to work, because this does feel like the future of college football is more expansion and like a lot of the realignment stuff we see for these teams. But this is a really interesting thing for sure.
Yeah, like in the domino, that's exactly what I'm thinking about this. And really what happens if CU moves, and then is U of A going to move soon after? There's some discussion with internal politics in the state with keeping ASU and U of A together. So there's a lot going on there. I know U of A fans seem to really want the Big 12 bad, whereas ASU fans seem to be a little more lukewarm, like like Utah fans.
So I really like this. I really like this GIF, right?
Yeah. Oh my.
It's been used and overused. We've seen it for 100 different combinations. It's Big Ten and Notre Dame and all these others. But this one today was really poignant to me because I honestly believe that even though Colorado probably will be the first one to go, I think the one that's wanted to go all along that has needed an excuse is Arizona, which is, I think, really interesting because of the Board of Regents meeting they have coming up. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Let's talk about this, JT. Let's dive right into this. Where are you personally at with Utah and realignment, and where you think we are in 3 months?
Well, that's the interesting thing is we do need to see where we're at in 3 months, I think, to your point, because we've got to get this media rights deal done. That is what everything hinges on. And, for so long, gosh, I remember back in March and April, I was telling people on my own show, like, this will be done. I've heard that we're getting close.
Right.
I had trusted at the time. Still do trust. I mean, you get your bad information sometimes, right? But like it, and I don't even think it's bad information. I think it's much as everyone thought it would be done, and then obviously something happened. It really seems like there's no rush for ESPN or any of the streaming services that are rumored to, like, they don't feel the pressure to get a deal done right now, with the Big 12 obviously having swooped in and scooped up all those time slots. So this has kind of started to drag out a process. I've heard a lot of people, June 30th is kind of the target. So we're coming down to the clock a little bit here. We're like a month away from that. But, on realignment, look, if the money comes out and it's really bad. Let's just say that. Like, if it's not even close to what the Big 12 is making.
Well, 44 million they distributed this year with only 10 teams. It's supposed to jump to 50 or 60 once you get all in, with all 4 teams as active participants.
Yeah. So that's your point. Like, if the Pac-12 is way off of that, then yes, then Utah will have no choice probably than to leave. But I still say this. To me, I feel like we're headed for 2 super conferences. That's just personally what I feel like it's going to be. I wish we were still in the days of 5 Power 5 conferences. Like, I wish that was the next 30, 40, whatever, the eternity of college football. I wish that's what we were talking about. But I really feel like the Big Ten and the SEC are going to swallow a lot of the major ones up just by the time 2026, 27, 28 kind of rolls around. So that's where, for me, I'm not as much like, oh, let's go to the Big 12 just to then jump off and leave. If they get an opportunity to super conference, who's to say Utah will, right? I know I did this on my own show that I just feel like with the level that Utah is operating at right now in football, the sport that generates the most revenue, I believe they will be involved in the future of college sports. In fact, I looked it up, and 7 different sites that predicted the future super conferences. One was Bleacher Report, Fan Side, a couple other major ones. They had all projected Utah, and BYU was in there as well. So, like, just, 2 major programs, like, we expect them to be involved in the future of college football. But just back to realignment, as I said, like, unless the money is just, like I said, if it's within 5 million, maybe even 10, if you just feel like there's rumblings about going on behind the scene that we're going to eventually leave for a super conference, that's where I don't just love going over to the Big 12 just to leave them in the next couple of years. But I also understand the side of things. It's like, hey, you got to do what's best for you right now. So I see a lot of appeal in going to the Big 12 too. It's just, once again, I feel like they should stay in the pack. But the longer the media stuff drags out, the more I get concerned.
No doubt.
Absolutely. Just to show you kind of an interesting dynamic, as we built this show and as we've looked at social media in the last 6-8 months, we're involving people from all walks of life, right? Just here's 2 of guys that I really respect and I've interacted with online and have been involved in our show. Larry Pilgrim, who's obviously a great advocate for everything Utah. I really respect his opinion and whatnot. Here he is interacting with a guy that is an Alabama booster, right? And I think what that shows you is that realignment is kind of become the catch-all for what we're all involved in, which is college athletics, football being primary. But at the end of the day, don't we want the best competition on the field? Isn't that what we should be, reaching for, instead of whether it's 2 conferences or 3 conferences? Don't we all just want to put the best teams on the field at the same time with the best opportunity to be successful?
Bomber, realignment's like playing the lottery.
Right.
It's for the dreamers out there, right? Like when the Utes were in the Mountain West, it was for the dreamers like me when I was a student there in the Mountain West days.
Right.
The Pac or the Big 12 at the time. So it's just fun to speculate and kind of think what could happen, what that means for your school. And so I think that folks just kind of love to think that way and dream that way too, and really what could it do for a San Diego State or somebody else. And so I think that it almost gets out of the sport and gets into a different realm and stuff where you
It really does.
for your school, kind of like your best for your family too, right?
Yeah.
Well, and you bring up a great point, Ute, is what do you do with a team? See, this is where I think you play Russian roulette and you can get caught out.
Mm-hmm.
If San Diego State, and these are all rumors, we don't have anything that's been written down, but San Diego State was basically told that once the Pac-12 gets their median deal, it's like an automatic. Step number 2 is SDSU. But if the Pac-12 ceases to exist the way that all three of us, and I think most of our followers enjoy, if you take 5 or 6 now G5s and you backfill them in a league that really, for all intents and purposes, is lots. It's P1 status, whatever you want to call that. I guess you go with the auto qualifier as I think the bigger number. If that's the case, then how does SDSU, and for that matter SMU, how do they stay in the game? Because you've got teams that are already in it. Oregon State and Washington State, who I think both are valuable and should be in a big league, are going to get screwed.
Yeah,
because there's only so many seats on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is what makes it sucks, right? Because look at Utah's perspective of how long it took them to get to the level
right
competing for a Pac-12 championship. It would take a similar timeline for San Diego State, for SMU to get back up there. The transfer portal's changed that a little bit, right? Because I talk all the time about one team could do this or one. I've said last year going into the college football season, I said I think Utah could make the college football playoff. Now, obviously they did not, but so I was wrong. You know who wasn't wrong? Whichever TCU fan said that.
Right, exactly right. Yeah.
You told me at the time TCU was going to be there. I've been like, get out of here. First year head coach, all this, no way. Especially look, Gary Patterson did a lot of stuff up there for them, and they obviously didn't come to a great end. But look, he's a very accomplished coach. That just shouldn't be. You shouldn't be able to have your best season of program history when you make a swap like that, and they were able to do it. So because college football has changed so much, it really is fascinating, interesting. And, you mentioned it is kind of the dangers of the game. If you do wait out and kind of see, if you are a Utah, like I mentioned, I don't feel like, because if I'm the Big 12, I do realize hey, we got to try to keep up with right now the SEC and the Big 10. I just don't feel like the Big 12 would pull Utah's invitation, if that was out there at any point, just because I think it's nice to have a program in Utah who, when you're looking at who would be some of the big schools the Big 10 would have. Let's say if the Pac-12 fell apart, then Oregon and Washington probably go over there, right?
Right.
Well, when you're talking about 4 of the Pac-12 schools that are now over there, Oregon and USC, Utah just beat both of them in a big-time Pac-12 championship game. So that's where, for me, Utah would still have value and still would be added. That's where I just don't feel like, look, if schools start to move, Utah's going to go with the trend. They're not going to be the lone school that's going to stay in the Pac-12 or something like that. If the other I trust Mark Harlan, the leadership they have there. If the other schools go, I just don't think Utah feels the pressure to be first, and I don't think they should, because I don't think they're in a position where they really are in danger of getting left behind, as I said, because I feel like their brand is at a really good position right now, and I don't see it falling off ever. Look, there's going to be years where this team's obviously not in the Pac-12 championship game.
Well, once Kyle retires, that's going to be very difficult transition, because
that's what will be interesting to see, right? There's a lot of rumors it's going to be Morgan Scalley if he's going to step in. We know about the controversies there, so are they going to make that change? We've seen some transitions go really well when that's the case, and others have not, because what is Morgan's balance, right? Does he want to be? He doesn't want to do things exactly as Kyle Whittingham did, right? He's going to do things slightly differently.
He's had some challenges with communication as well, right? He's done some things up at the U that he's wanted to change, and by the way, I think everybody should be able to do that. Everybody makes mistakes, right? And doing something like that, we don't need to get into that. But I really like Morgan. I think he's a good coach, and I do think he's probably right behind Kyle. But Kyle, let's be honest, is 1 in a million, right? Yes. He came in and he was basically an exact copy. He did everything that Lavelle Edwards did, and he's been successful for 20 years because of it. And I think we need to recognize that and say the one concern that I would say for Utah, and you've spoken on this several times, is the value. You say values, quote unquote. They don't care. USC and Oregon don't care if Utah's beat them, right? To them, they still believe they're at a much higher level, regardless of who wins the Pac-12 for the next 10 years, because their perception is built on something else. It's not what's happening on the field. It's how they are in the club. And Utah's new to the club.
Yes.
So I would only say, and I want to hear your opinion about this, because we talked about it before, but maybe it's changed, is do you want to just wait and run the risk that you don't control your own future? Because I don't think of an invitation to the Big Ten is coming in 10 years.
Right.
It might be there in 15 years.
That's
I'm not
the
saying it'll
caveat.
never happen. Go ahead.
That's the caveat, right? Like the long-term, what's best for Utah in the long term? Everyone knows it that's listening to this. We all know it is getting into the Big Ten. Guess what? That's best for everybody that's not in the Big Ten or SEC.
That's right. Or the SEC. Right.
And so that's how do you try to get there? That's really what we're talking about, I guess, as Ute fans. Like, personally, I don't think that, being in the Pac versus the Big 12 is going to change that. I think that if the Big 10 wants Utah and if they're a Big 12 team, then they're going to come get them versus being in the Pac too. Like, I don't think it really matters that much. As far as getting left behind, yeah, I mean, it could, it's hard to see it actually. Mm-hmm. It's still hard to see it. I just don't see Utah getting left behind by the Big 12 and not getting, any offers and staying in a conference with Oregon State and Wazoo and maybe a Cal and Stanford. I just have a hard time seeing that because of the football success, because of the athletics in general, the quality and everything that Utah brings. I mean, obviously we've talked about, academics and things that really trigger folks, but in Utah is a huge medical school, like a huge hospital on campus.
Isn't the problem demographics though? Utah's got 3.5 million people. Seattle has 8 million people in its metropolitan area. There's no way that Utah, from a demographic standpoint, is going to qualify. They can't compete with 4 ACC schools. I don't see them being able to compete with Cal and Stanford. So the only way that works is if they go to 24 teams. Do you see the Big going to 24 teams anytime in the next two decades?
I don't know. That's a tough one. Okay. I think that
you can TJ.
If we're heading for super conferences, that's why. So that I think, and that this is something I probably should explain on my show a little bit more, because I think people get all mad at me when I say like, oh, Utah maybe to the Big Ten if they go to a super conference. I should define what I think a super conference is. I think it is like 25 teams. That's where it's not like the big. It's not like even like they just raise it for a few more and then like, oh, they're one of the last ones in there. And we've even seen some conferences projections are even bigger than that. So that's where I think Utah's going to have a shot. Utah will not be one of the first calls the Big Ten makes, but if the SEC and the Big Ten really start absorbing schools and like the masses, that's where I think Utah has a chance, because we are going to be getting into smaller and smaller demographics. It's like a draft, right? Like slowly and surely, the top teams, the top demographics, all that are going to get taken off the board, and eventually, I think a place like Utah that also, like, if you continue to put yourself in position where you're a top 10 team, those are the kind of teams that people still tune in and want to see. That's where I think Utah will still have a chance for this, and that's why like I said, for me personally, I still think we're going to super conferences. And that's why I think Utah to the Big Ten has a shot. Because once you're talking about 25 to 30 teams, that's where it kind of gets opened up to Utah, because then we're way past the time that Washington and Oregon got the invite.
Yeah, I mean, the 25 team idea is an interesting one. I'm just kind of thinking through that. I'm wondering how to make that work revenue-wise for all the schools.
I think the money's drying up, guys.
Well, yeah,
we're reaching a point where there's no more money.
Getting conferences that big might be a challenge too.
I don't.
A huge TV contract. So that's just my only thoughts, like against that idea, I guess. But like, I mean, it could happen, right? I think for me, 20 makes a lot of sense. It's clean.
Yeah, I can see 3 of 20. I can't see 2 of 26.
And like in Utah, it's hard to kind of pencil them in if the ACC.
Well, let's just run down those. I don't have those lists, but let's talk about a draft.
Okay?
You're the Big Ten. You're the Big Ten.
On a 25 team.
Let's do it right now. Let's do it right now. I don't have a list up. I don't have a graphic to go over, but let's just talk about this for a second. You guys want to be real? Let's be real. You're the Big Ten draft. You're the Big Ten, and you can take any school that's not already in your conference or is in the SEC. And what order would you take those?
Notre Dame.
Okay.
Are you Notre Dame? That's exactly what I was thinking.
Okay, Notre Dame, there's one.
Notre Dame. I mean, you said ACC too, right? So I can get Clemson.
Yeah, you can go Big 12, you can go ACC, whoever you want.
Clemson. Well, the one thing I do want to factor in this too is because we're just drafting for the Big Ten right now, right? Like the
Right.
SEC would be
That's
happy.
exactly right.
If we get to super conferences, the SEC would be having one too. So,
but they're not going to come much further west. The SEC likes where they're at. I don't think so. They don't get past Texas, I don't think.
Maybe they won't, but if they don't get past it, then maybe they're the ones who can lure in a Clemson and lure in a Florida State and some of those bigger, more.
I know, but we're talking numbers here. Right now, they're going to be at 16 when USC and UCLA join. That means there's only 8 slots.
Yeah.
Hey,
give me a count where Utah is ahead of a North Carolina. Give me a count where they're ahead of Clemson.
Okay, so we're talking like an 8-spot
or Miami, order, right? I'm just telling you, Oregon and Washington, Cal, Stanford. The numbers aren't there.
If I'm laying out the pecking order, this would be good for like the Big Ten or the SEC.
Right?
The most valuable brands: Notre Dame, Florida State, Clemson. I think Washington's right there, and I think Oregon's right there. North Carolina.
But now we're over. Now you're 27, 28 teams. Utah. All I'm saying is Utah is not on the first page.
You're right.
Utah's probably about 10 in the pecking order, 11.
So if you guys can both look in the mirror and say you're not on the first page, then isn't it time to adapt and start thinking more forward, which is what Brett Yormark's been doing. That's why he's been as successful, right?
So what I'm worried about, though, is they're going to be taking Big 12 schools too, right? That's where
they can take any school they want. Absolutely.
That's where I don't know. Like I said, I just don't know if it is. If they're getting pulled as well, that's where it's also like, is it better for them to go to the Big 12? And I know you talked about the money and everything not being there. That could be true. But also, like I said, I mean, I feel like they have a chance to control everything in college football. I mean, we could see these media deals get torn up, and then there's even more revenue for them because they're able to bring in all the TV deals. Like there's been rumors about the NCAA being really left behind, right? So that's right. I feel like there could be a lot more money available. But look, you do make a really good point in talking about, hey, there's not enough seats at the table when you do if you have your pick of all these different brands, if you are the SEC and if you are the Big Ten,
right,
that's going to be close for Utah. And I'm curious to see, because if they do hard cap it at 50 and they already have that many schools in, that's where, like you said, it may be tough. But we have seen some super conference projections that extend even beyond 50 teams. So, and that's really interesting to see if they can get in or not.
But all three of us know that Utah and BYU, frankly, are worth more than Missouri. They're worth more than Rutgers. They're worth more than Indiana. That's not life, right? The contracts are built around these big conferences by demographics and by legacy. So we're out here in the hinterland. Frankly, they forget about everybody between Oklahoma and Oregon. You basically disappear into a black hole. So rather than wait for the call, Brett Yormark is doing the opposite. He's being proactive and tried to build something that is strong. So my question to you as Utah fans, why don't you want to be part of that instead of holding out and hoping that you'll be saved?
So my response to that is I might want to be a part of it. I would just wait and see what the Pac-12's deal comes in at and everything there. Like I said, I just don't feel like you need to be the first one to go. I still feel like there'd be an opportunity there with the Big 12 if you do see Colorado goes. Then if like both the Arizona schools are going to jump, then it's like, okay, what are we still doing at this point? Then let's go too. That's where, like I said, I don't feel a need to be first. That's why I want to wait and see. That you very well may be correct. It may be better to go to the Big 12, but that's where I just want to see what the media rights deals come in at. I want to see how more of the college football realignment and everything shakes out too. That's where, like I said, I'm more just in wait mode and see what happens. Once again, I don't feel like Utah's really in danger of getting left behind right now, just because of the level they're operating at. And you do make a great point in the tradition and everything that's there too. They're not as strong of a media draw. I think they're in the process of making themselves into a media draw.
Right.
But to your point, history does rule out. That's why USC was a bigger grab when, if you look at the past 10 years, or maybe not 10, but I'll say the past 5 years for sure, Utah's undoubtedly had the better program.
Absolutely.
For sure about the history. So that's where you make
right.
a lot of really good points, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. But as I said, I just don't feel like Mark Harlan and everyone there, I don't think they feel rushed to make a decision, because I don't think that they feel like that invitation is going to get yanked in a month if they don't leave a month from now.
I think that Utah's waiting this out because there's the only chance they get in the Big Ten. Like, this is how I see it.
You keep saying Big Ten, though, Ute. Come on.
It's completely relevant to this topic on why Utah's waiting.
Okay.
I'm serious about that.
Okay, I know we've talked about it several times. You know, in the AAU news
westward without a Notre Dame or ACC grab, then all of a sudden you're grabbing 4 schools getting you 20. If they make that decision, while unlikely, if they make that decision, Utah has a chance to be the last puzzle piece.
No, Cal and Stanford get those slots.
Well, Stanford, yeah, but I don't think Cal gets in.
Cal goes with
It's a
Stanford.
redundant market. It really is.
No, I don't think so.
And like they don't even care about football up there.
But that you're misunderstanding. Utah has been dominant in football, and they've had other good sports. Your softball team just did wonderful, right? In the past, you've had better basketball, but it's a great program. Nobody's denying that. All I'm saying is, from a perception standpoint, I've been doing this for almost a full year, and I've gone and been on shows across the country in every conference. And the one thing that keeps coming back is it's not what have you done for me lately. It's what is the value of the asset by itself in a silo. And you could say you're the best program in the West Coast. You can say that you're the best program west of the Mississippi. All that may be true, but that doesn't mean that these big players that have been together for over 100 years are going to look at a Utah and say, yeah, they're definitely up with us. It's a club. So why do you think, and I think this is where frustration comes from people in the Big 12, is that the sense is you guys, the fan base, and Mark Harlan has not done himself any favors either by saying things like, we're going to wait because we always know there's going to be something there. That may be true, but you're banking your entire entity on somebody else. You're not controlling your own destiny. And people look at that from the outside and they don't understand why you would continue to hold out for something that it might be 50-50, but even if it was 50-50, the numbers don't support adding that many more teams.
Yeah, I think for the reason they're waiting is like, well, and the one thing I go back to is they're involved in the conversation. I think one of the reasons Mark Harlan's willing to wait is he knew if everyone was going to jump, I think he'd be ready to do it too. He's not an idiot to me. Like, I think he knows what the best move is.
You really believe that? Because I don't get that from him.
That what?
I don't think he does think that he will go to the Big 12.
I think it's all just talk until it happens. Honestly, I think it all sounds good right now, but these things can change so quickly. It's kind of like when coaches or whatever are like, oh, we're not going to trade a star player. We like this guy. And then all of a sudden, boom, they do that to me. It's just, you don't want to show your cards or anything in that regard to me. I think they're still holding out hope. Maybe the Pac-12 will figure itself out, but if it's not, they'll be ready to make that jump and change too. I feel like they've done this so long now. Like they just know what to give the media and what not to give the media. That's where I feel like they do have a good grasp and handle on everything. And like I said, I just feel like if all those schools are going to head out and go, we started this, we'll talk about just Colorado, right? We're not talking about all the other schools. That's where I feel like they're still in a position where they can kind of sit back and make a decision and really see what is the best move for them. And that very well may be the Big 12. And I think just because people are waiting for maybe a Big 10 invite or maybe saying to stay in the Pac-12, to me, I've never once tried to put down the Big 12 and acted like they weren't a great
Yeah,
option.
I haven't gotten that from you.
No, and I know you had, yeah, but I think people just because you're like, oh, I wish we could stay in the Pac. Because the truth is, I do wish we could stay in the Pac. I wish we were all back to normal, right? I wish USC and UCLA were still in the Pac-12, obviously. I wish that was the way things are, but it's not how things are currently. So each school has to do what's best for them. And I personally trust the leadership to make that decision. I think they've handled everything really well so far. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this all shakes out. And it all starts with Colorado's decision, because if Colorado leaves, that's where it's going to be really interesting to see if other schools are like, you know what, we need to make the move. We need to make the change now. And they must not, if they really are seriously considering moving this much, that whatever rumblings they're hearing about the media rights deal must concern them. And if they do jump, they probably won't be the last we'll see this year. And that very well could include Utah going over to the Big 12.
If the Arizona schools go with Colorado, if it happens, then Utah has to go.
I think they do too. And then what's interesting with that is it's like, if they leave, then does if the Big 10 is still not offered something to Oregon and Washington, that's where it would be interesting to see if they would then get included.
I think they may, because of the distribution that Yormark just did. Obviously, he didn't do it. The conference did it with their media deal, but they gave every school $44 million, which is almost 50% more than they were anticipated to be 2 years ago. That number spoke loud, and it was noticed by everybody. And if the Big 10 doesn't go, I've always contended, I think everybody from the Pac-12 should come to the Big 10. Or Big 12, I'm sorry. I think they should have created a super conference already. And the fact that it didn't happen, we don't need to drill down into all those things. But how much better would every school in the Pac-12 now that's relevant How much better would that be with a just as powerful Big 12? Instead of looking at we're superior, why aren't we stronger together? And that's why the valuations are different. People have said in several, and I don't know if on your show this has happened, but people have brought up the comment of why is ESPN willing to pay more, $32 million for Utah to come to the Big 10 or Big 12? I keep saying that, to the Big 12. They'll pay $32 million, but the Pac-12 by itself is only like 20. It doesn't make sense unless you say we're stronger together. The value is higher. And in fact, the value might go up of the media contract if those schools come over. I'm sure Mark's already looked into that.
Yeah, definitely.
Here's a comment from Clint Moses, who's a valued follower and watcher. I appreciate everybody watching. We just take so many comments now. If you want your comment to be highlighted and gone through, I'm trying to get through them and scan them. But if you want to do that, please leave a tip and a comment. And then I'll make sure that that's read on the show and we talk about it. But this one from Clint, I think, has been what's basically been out there from the beginning, and that is nobody leaves the pack for the Big 12. Just a simple statement. What is that, 5-6 words?
Yeah,
and yet that's been the attitude. So what do you guys say to that now?
I think that there's enough smoke around Colorado that'll be weary of saying that right now. CMU might stay, but I mean, it looks.
I will say I've heard from people who are not like, it's not like they directly know people, but people who do look at this stuff a lot, and they still were very skeptical about Colorado going to the Big 12. So that's where, when it happens, we'll see. I mean, do you guys think it's going to happen still? I still don't think, I just still don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to wait a little bit and still see what the media rights and everything comes up by out. But I mean, I definitely don't feel as confident saying that as I did in the past. But if I still had to bet one way or another, I would still bet they stay, at least for the short term. What would you guys do?
Yeah, I think that I do think that CU is going to move.
You do,
and I think that U of A is going to. Got to put a weight on that, maybe 60%. It's not like it's like 90% or anything. I feel confident with that, but I'm kind of leaning that way. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that domino effect could come into play. So right now, I kind of see Utah really almost like a 45-45 in the Pac and Big 12, and then there's that little inkling of the Big 10 for dreamers over here. So that's how I see it shaking out. I really do. I think that there's some legs behind this one.
Colorado's affinity with the Big 12 is longstanding.
Yeah.
The schools that they've associated with, this is not new for them. Is there a little bit of a pride ego hit? Maybe. But again, going back to math and what's been reported, just on the 2 contracts that were over the last 12 years since they moved, Colorado's made $50 million less than if they'd stayed in the Big 12.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
that's real money.
Larry Scott for you.
Right.
That is real money. And you can blame whoever you want. At this point, it doesn't really matter who you blame. Yeah. You're making an excuse, but it's not a solution. I don't see how CU stays in the Pac-12. They don't have a real reason to. They lost their big gravitas when USC left.
Well, the one thing I will still, didn't the Big 12 use it? I mean, look, they were first to get a media deal and all of that stuff too, but they lost some of their gravitas too, obviously.
Of course.
Texas and Oklahoma too. So,
yeah, I don't decline that. I don't fight against that. That's a fact.
Yeah, I think the one thing that makes this very interesting, right, is right now Colorado would be the first, and at least like you said, maybe Arizona would soon, but like if it was really bad, and like I said, this is where I feel like something's getting lost in reporting. Wouldn't we hear way more rumors about every other school doing something, trying to get over? Why would Colorado be the only one to me? That's where I feel like I still don't think all things are kind of like doomsday scenario, because I think we would hear like, oh, boom, like some Pete Thamel report, like, oh, the 4 corner schools are on the verge of actually leaving. That's where I think it is just interesting to see that it is right now. Colorado is the only one. That's where I think there must be something missing here.
It's not Thamel, but who reported today? Was it Tim Brando, that he thought that the 4 corner schools?
Yeah, he put out a thing today about that. Yeah,
he was saying that. I mean, take it for what it is.
Is that opinion, or did he have sources?
He didn't cite him if he had a source.
He's more of an opinion guy. But he's been in the game a very long time, so even his opinions do have. I'm sure he's got some weight to it.
Well, let's play the hypothetical here. I want to talk about the pros and the cons. If Utah were to go into the Big 12, the pros and the cons of that move. Okay, let's just say that it happened. I want to talk about what you guys think would be a pro and a con versus where Utah's at right now.
Can I name the first pro for me?
Go ahead,
Sure.
JT. You can go first.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
By far the first one for me. And look, I get you guys can hit on the stability and all that thing with having a media right secure. To me, it's by far getting to play BYU every year. It's just such a bummer to me that you don't get to play like last year, you don't play your rival. Like, to me, that's such a missed opportunity in college football. That's one of the things I love about college football is literally like when you're going down the calendar of the top sports like weekends of the year. And I know Utah's not in like rivalry weekend, but I look forward to Michigan playing Ohio State, obviously, Alabama, Auburn, even though that one hasn't been as competitive as of recently. And I would just love to see BYU and Utah play year in and year out. So that's the one thing I would very quickly get on board of, hey, we get to play BYU. I think it's so great with how we know how close the schools are, obviously, the passion behind the fan bases and everything too. So that would kind of be the one thing that would really get me excited about a move to the Big 12 outside of just the fact of like, oh, hey, I don't have to talk about media rights deal every show.
Right. Well, I think just being on this show, you understand where both you and I stand. Absolutely, we want the rivalry back. I want it in the conference. I've wanted it since they left the pack. I'd hoped that BYU would get that invite, but that was obviously never coming. So being in the conference, at least for people in the Big 12, they understand the value of the rivalry. That's something that we've learned from media and influencers over the last several months, talking to them, and the fact that they value BYU and Utah as a rivalry. And the value that it brings as a package to both schools and then to the conference as a whole. You imagine rivalry week, and let's just do this really quick, but you have ASU and U of A, you got BYU and Utah, you got TCU and Baylor. I mean, these are big brands that are playing big games.
I want another crack at TCU. I want
Oklahoma State and Texas Tech.
They whooped us last time we played them.
Well, and you guys have your chance with Baylor this year, right? Good luck with that.
That's right.
But I think we all see the value in them getting together. I just wish that I think everybody just wants it to be over. And I think it's great for clicks. It's great for our shows. It's fun to talk about. But it's a stretch to say that social media is really doing anything more than aggravating the people in charge.
Yeah, no doubt.
Absolutely. I think that's where we see some of the perception. I know someone commented on something I put out there not long ago, like people do think like the fan bases are like getting so bad at this point that like that's why the Big 12 wouldn't want Utah is because of how the fans kind of react.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
Yes, which is it is because
it's just ignore any of that. You know, it's blowback from the way the whole thing started. We don't need to go through all that. It was messy. But we do now see that, and Bob Thompson said this last September. He said that rivalries are the number one reason that drives dollars and media value to any conference.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about BYU Utah is getting in a rivalry weekend too, I think would add to some of the hype. I mean, years ago, it was a ESPN game. I think it was Tyler Huntley, and it might have been some other crew was there for too, but I remember specifically the one in 2019 was, Tyler Huntley in Utah going up to play Zach Wilson, everyone at BYU. And ESPN, look, they still had it, like, it was still like good crew there, but it wasn't like anywhere near the top five, which of the games that weekend, I was like, man, like a rivalry game with this kind of a storyline, I feel like it should. I feel like people just don't feel the same weight of it because, like we mentioned, they're not in the same conference. So that's where being in the same conference would give it a lot of that weight. I think it's really easy to, when you put them in the same conference, like once you start peeling back the history and the tradition behind it, some of the games and the finishes and the players and the performances we've seen, it's easy to get really excited about that too. And I do think it's something you could really market. And I should say, as an honorable mention, like second pro and con, we can finally stop like the forced Utah-Colorado rivalry.
Yeah,
right.
No one cares about. Like Utah gets this year's game will be different just because of Deion Sanders, right?
Right.
He is the only reason that game will get. And look, maybe Colorado will surprise some people and be interesting and be competitive in that game. I just would, based on just how big of a turnaround that would be, I would be surprised. I think there's still a chance. I shouldn't say competitive. They should be competitive in it. I just don't know if the game will have much weight to it or matter because it's just hard for me to see. Colorado won one game last year. I know they had a lot of turnover on the roster, but it's hard to me all of a sudden seeing 5-6 win teams. So that'd be the other appealing thing once again is you kind of officially stop the rivalry with the Buffs that has, when you talk about like no tradition, that's what that rivalry has.
I would love to have 4 divisions of 5 schools and Colorado, BYU, Utah, Arizona State.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And think about those games every year being relevant. They're not throwaway games. They're not the games that are on ESPN Plus anymore. They're going to be highlighted on Fox and ESPN1, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's what Yormark is going to do. Now, I don't have any facts behind that. I just have been observing him, but it seems to me like he would turn those things into events. BYU Utah would have its own college game day. It doesn't have to be ESPN's. Big 12 could create their own. I could see, because that's what he does is marketing, and that's how he sees value. Just imagine that 5-school pod playing every year: TCU, OSU, Baylor. Even throw in Iowa State. I mean, Texas Tech. Are you kidding me? Those are great games.
Yeah. For me, a big pro is the exposure. I want to see the Utes as a Ute fan here. I want to see them on Big Fox. I want to see them in big games. I want to see eyeballs on them. I'm really concerned that, if we sign an Apple, the Pac signs an Apple contract, that there won't be very many eyeballs, right? If it's like paid subscription based. Big concerns there, big questions, big risks. And I just don't want to fall behind if, without exposure for 5 years, 3 years. I think that, the program could really fall behind quickly if no one's watching, no one's caring, recruiting falls behind. So that's a big one. The exposure piece. I think leadership, Yormark is a dynamic leader.
Right.
And, it's fun to think what he can do with Utah, with the rivalry. If we come in as, again, like the villain or the bad guy, whatever,
I love that. I think that's great.
Yeah,
There's no problem with that at all.
The Big 12.
In fact, I think it enhances the likability, right? People love to hate Dallas Cowboys. Either you're a go Cowboys or you hate them. There's no middle ground there, right? Yeah. So I think there's a lot to that. We have a comment here from Larry. Larry, thanks for the tip. And he's exactly right. Utah and BYU have always faced rejection. What do you think about that, JT?
Well, first, I do want to say Larry's someone who's tuned in on my show too a few times, so I always appreciate his support. He was one of the first ones who would comment on my stuff when I was first starting on the show, so I always appreciate Larry. I will say, I feel like Utah has started to take some of those steps, right? I can't even tell you guys how many videos I've watched with college football analysts where they're like, man, Utah is a really tough out. They're a tough team. And I think you've even seen the year past, like some of those games against Oregon, some of those games against USC are drawing more than they had in the past, right? So they're at least facing some steps in the right direction. I'm not saying they're anywhere near the top brands or anything like that, but I do at least feel like they're making some of the steps. And I'll say to BYU as well, I think they'll get to that position too. As you know, it takes a little bit to get up to speed.
Right. It will be a few years.
It'll be a transition, just like it was for Utah when they made the jump from the Mountain West over to the Pac-12. But I think BYU will get there too. So they have faced a little bit of rejection, but I just feel like if they continue to win and continue to build something, that does go away less and less, because once again, I can't even tell you guys how many times I've tuned into College Game Day and Kirk Herbstreit, Joe Klatt talking about how great Utah is. And you mentioned earlier, about just getting on Big Noon and all the things that we've seen before. And this is where Big Noon might change a little bit if they got some of those games and I believe they're involved in the deal with the Big 12 still. So they will be keeping all those. We saw that last year they broke their big game, their noon rule for the UCLA USC game.
That's
fantastic game. And those two brands, yes, they draw a lot more once again. But if Utah continues to take those steps, as we talked about, they are a prominent team. Yes, the history is always going to sell the best, but what sells if you don't have that ranking, that number right next to it, if it can be a top 10 matchup, it can be a top 15 matchup. That's where I think Utah and eventually BYU too can take the steps forward where more people want to tune in for those games and see that, and you face less rejection.
No doubt. And I've lived in Utah for 25 years, guys. And so this is an insider perspective here, but Utah and BYU have always been the underdogs. Nationally. Guess what? The Utah Jazz are the underdogs too. For whatever reason, in our little culture here and stuff, we're always looked down upon or looked over. And so BYU and Utah both have that chip on their shoulders. And so I agree with Larry 100%. That's just kind of how a lot of folks feel out here.
Eddie, thank you for the $10 tip. I really appreciate it. I don't see a comment with it. I appreciate the tip, but I really want to thank you for the tip. But if you have a comment, please here it is. He put it in below. I apologize. Let's read this. I think add the 4 corner schools would be great. Pod 1, Utah, BYU, Arizona, Arizona State, and that's only 4. So he's breaking them into 4 team quads. Colorado, OSU, K-State, and KU. Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, and Houston. That could be a great grouping. And ISU, UCF, Cincinnati, West Virginia. Boy, that looks appealing to me. What do you guys think?
Oh, I really like it. Since we've been talking about this TV deal, it's such a mess, and it just looks exciting to kind of look at what opponents you might be playing in this theoretical situation. But like, yeah, it just makes so much sense in a pod. But I mean, BYU and Utah are going to be in a pod no matter what, right?
Right.
There's on ASU. We've got the history with them. Colorado. Yeah, I mean, I guess in this case they're in a different pod and stuff. I could see it those four or even that five and adding Colorado in. But I think that it's dynamite. It's good. That's exactly how it needs to be.
Yeah, I think it looks great. The pods, everything, how it all plays out like that. If this is how it worked out, I wouldn't be mad at it at all. I think the nice thing too, just specifically focusing on the BYU Utah, that pod one we see is I really believe both Arizona and Arizona State are trending in the right directions now. Everything we've heard from Kenny Dillingham has been really positive. Them landing Rashad has led to a lot of excitement there. Look, they're not going to be very good this year. It's his first year. It takes time to build a brand unless you're Lincoln Riley and can recruit Caleb Williams over basically. Like it takes time to build things up. I think they're trending in the right direction. Arizona, look, they won 4 more games than they did in 2021, in 2022 than they did the year prior. They're not going to make that same jump. The Pac-12 is too good, but once again, trending in the right direction to me. So that's where I think, and we already talked about BYU. I feel like it just takes a little bit when you do make that transition. But by the time this pod were to become official, I do feel like BYU would be at a point too, where this is a kind of pod where I think any of these schools with the level Utah's recruiting at right now, I think any of those schools could win too. And even just looking at the other ones, I mean, pod 3 from a basketball standpoint, just getting to see Baylor and Houston with those two have turned into right now. Texas
exactly.
Tech, I know they have to make a coaching change because some things happened there, but they've been in there as well. So I think every single one of these pods has a lot of potential and really exciting too. And I think this is one of the ideas in realignment that I think would make people really interested right away.
Yeah, another pro for the Big 12 is basketball, like said JT. Yes. Like basketball for the Utes. The Utes basketball has been pretty bad for a while here, but there's a lot of history behind the program. Utah's won a national championship actually many years ago.
What was that, like 48 or something like that?
Yeah, it was.
Hey, I'm not taking away from it. BYU doesn't have one, so I think that's fantastic.
That's the only championship that the Utes have had in football or men's basketball.
I really like the value that both our schools bring wherever we go. I think it was unfortunate that they got split for a little while, but if everything goes the way I hope it does, I really hope that we're in the same conference. I'm not going to shy away from that comment. And I want to follow up with Joe Burke, who's a big Hail Montezuma fan. And he wants the SDSU and BYU rivalry. SDSU and Utah had a rivalry as well in the WAC and then in the Mountain West. And I would love to have SDSU in, but as we're talking about seats, how many seats are going to be on the bus? I just, unless Utah holds out, which I guess there's a chance. If everything went and the 2 Arizonas and Colorado went and Utah held out, SDSU would then have a choice. But Yormark might blow the whole thing up and just bring in UConn and not care.
Yeah.
SDSU is going to end up in a better place than the Mountain West at the end of the day. Because, I mean, if Cal and Stanford don't go over to the Big Ten, then they might be able to hitch their wagon to those schools.
Yeah.
I know that's a huge desire for SDSU. So I think that they're going to be in good shape. I don't know if it's going to be in the Big 12, but maybe in some version of the Pac for sure.
And I'll say this too, for the schools that do get like left behind, for lack of a better word, like if San Diego State did, and this all happened and Utah went to the Big 12 and everything like that, what's to stop BYU from playing a non-conference game against them, having a kind of deal that Utah and BYU had worked out for
right?
So I think that would be really cool if we could continue to see some of these fun games and battles go on, if this is what conference realignment took us to eventually, and that's kind of how it played out. I think it would be fun to see these schools continue to play, and I think it's something that's still very much possible, because we are going to see teams continue to kind of like, look, when you have a non-conference schedule, you're going to continue to play some teams that aren't at the Power 5 level, is what we used to call it. That's obviously changing with conference realignment.
Right.
Playing San Diego State a lot more than I like what the SEC does every single year, and they schedule like a Charlton or whoever comes up on the schedule.
Right.
Yeah, no one wants to watch that, but yet it goes on ESPN because it's Alabama. So
yeah,
it works.
That's broken, in my opinion. Just so everybody knows who's watching, appreciate everybody watching. Please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment. I'm trying to answer all comments, but it's getting to a point where I'm running out of time every day, but I'm trying really hard to respond. And we're certainly highlighting comments that are on tips during the show. Please feel free to just leave a tip and it'll highlight to me and I'll make sure your comment's read. This one I really like, and I don't know much about it. I'm just learning. We were talking to Tom Fitzgerald the other day, and he was mentioning K-State stuff. And this Farmageddon with K-State and Iowa State, and also KU, I think those are way underutilized rivalries.
Isn't that a great name? Farmageddon? Come
Right.
on. That's got to be the best name. I know K-State and KU, and I'm learning more about the Farmageddon. Like, it seems like that name has been trending the last few years at least. I mean, I'm kind of a legacy K-State fan, and I wasn't overly aware of it about 10 years ago and stuff. So it looks like this game is kind of trending in the right direction. I know that K-State rivalry in football, and especially basketball, is fire for sure.
Eddie gave us another tip, $2 tip, but again, I don't see his comment. Maybe he's typing still. But thank you for the tip, Eddie. I really appreciate it. It helps us keep the lights on.
Guys, in the meantime, I don't want to be like overly divisive with this, okay? But what are the cons, okay, with Utah going to the Big 12? Like, let's just talk about that.
Sure.
I think that's like worth considering the pros and the cons here.
Well, I'll bring up what I said earlier is just if we do see a world where there does become a super conference, and let's say in this scenario, Utah does go into that, right? Like join a conference just to leave them 4 years later. Like to me, that just wouldn't sit right. But this is where I just trust the decision makers to, like, if they make this move, I think they make it expecting that Utah is going to be in the Big 12 for the foreseeable future.
Right.
This isn't free agency, right? We're not going to one team and then in 4 years we're looking to get another max contract. That's
absolutely.
So that would be my only thing is I just don't want to go somewhere if college football blows up and then it becomes something completely new.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that I kind of see it, I think that there are going to be 3 conferences, maybe 4. Definitely the P2, like you're mentioning. But if there is a P3, it looks like right now the Big 12 is in the strongest position to be that. So that's my perspective on it. I think that, cons with the Utes, I'll be honest, like it's fun having the geography of the pack. I mean, I love like going to California and everything for games. You got Arizona, you've got Colorado and stuff. It's just been really cool to be a part of that. Plus, I mean, Ute fans love the pack because of the invite, right? The original invite.
Absolutely, and the loyalty has value. I think the loyalty is significant. I just think it's sad that you guys are the ones that are being the most loyal, and there's reasons for that, right? But I mean, it kind of. I don't want to say it diminishes, but basically what it does when everybody else is looking at you, it's like it almost feels like Utah's holding on so tight that there's a bit of a concern there that maybe it's overdone. Yeah. You see where I'm going with that?
I definitely see that. Like I said, once again, from the fan perspective, I definitely see that. And from even what we've seen has been reported so far, I definitely see that as well. But I feel like that's the kind of emotions and stuff that when the people that Mark Harlan, the president, everyone, when they make those decisions, those kind of emotions get checked at the door and they can see the writing on the walls. This is, like we said, they're not going to go down with the ship and be the only team if everyone else is jumping off and leaving. And the last con I think I would add really quick is what you guys are hitting on. Just, it's been a fun tradition to look forward to playing Washington State, to playing Oregon. We've already lost that and playing USC, right? So losing that would be a con to me.
Yeah. And the biggest is the California recruiting pipeline, guys.
Yes. Great point.
You're getting Texas, but I mean, Texas is pretty saturated. It's really saturated. SEC, Big 12, everybody else goes down in Texas. So you add that, you add Florida too with UCF, but that California pipeline is big for the Utes. I mean, that's where Cam Rising came out of. So many great U players came out of California. So
well, now think about Texas. Now think about Florida, because these are places that you're not traditionally, have access to those groups. That's why playing a game at Florida last year was so big. One, it shows you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and go play real football. And 2, it gives you an area that you can recruit that normally you wouldn't have access to. And I think that Utah would be brilliant at that. I think they have every opportunity to take advantage. Just one thing about the moving and sort of the planning standpoint is when Mark Harlan says, we're not moving, or whatever his comment was, right? It's not going to happen or something like that. And then later we hear, well, maybe, but only as an alternate. It's the attitude, I think, what people pick on to. It's not the actual how good is Utah.
That's a great point. I think it's absolutely what it is. I think the interesting thing with Utah moving down there too is you're right. The level of recruits they would get in Texas and Florida would be stronger. They have recruited some really strong players from those states, but it's been the diamonds in the rough. Brant
Right.
Keefe, 2-star. Braden Daniels was a solid recruit, but not as highly heralded by everyone else. I look back at Florida, Utah getting Tyler Huntley right. Jalen Glover's a guy they got recently there. So I would just be very interested to ask the coaches and feel how they felt about if they would like join the Big 12. Maybe that does strengthen their Florida and the position they're in Texas, while maybe weakening where they're at in California a little bit, which they have gotten some strong players in that regard too. So it's just something interesting.
Hey, what's going on? How you doing?
I'm going to bring in Tide Guy. We've been messaging back and forth for a few months now, and I really respect his opinion, and he's wanted to be active on our show today, so I've invited him. Really quick, before I turn it over to you for a couple minutes, Tide, I just wanted to say this comment from C. Kaufman. I like watching you guys when I can live. Just keep up the good work. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And please follow Locked On Utes, and please follow Tide Guy. These are people that really their opinions matter, and social media has a lot of power. And I'm not saying we can change realignment, but we certainly can let people know kind of how people are feeling. All right, Tide, what do you got for us today?
Okay. I do numbers. Okay. I'm with a couple other guys. We do numbers. Okay. I don't have a dog in this fight. As you see, I'm Alabama. I'm the SEC. And in my mind, if we went to a power 2, it helps me, my team. But I don't want that. That ruins college football. Okay. I'm living with my dad right now. I come back to Iowa to have some surgery. So I live 25 minutes from Ames, Iowa. Okay. Iowa State University. And I appreciate what they do. And I have tons of friends who graduated from there. But my thing is, I look at this realignment as numbers. Now, the one guy said that he believes that, we'll go to 25-25. That's just not doable with the numbers. When you look at the numbers, 18 and 18 barely work. 20 and 20 is probably where it'll end, because nobody in the SEC wants to add if it takes away. And when we go to 18, it takes away. It will not add. So we will probably end up going to 20 just to match the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. The only teams right now that will add for the Big Ten is Notre Dame. And Notre Dame will carry a team.
Stanford.
No, believe it or not. No, listen to this. This will blow your mind. It's not Stanford who Notre Dame wanted.
Okay.
You know who Notre Dame wanted?
No, I don't.
Utah.
North Carolina.
Yeah, I've heard that
Why?
too.
Why didn't they want North Carolina? They wanted North Carolina.
Yeah.
But the Big Ten talked them into settling with Miami. Now, and again, I don't want to bore all your listeners in this and that, but if you guys go back to last Thursday, look to see who got AAU status and why that is important. Okay, right. The AAU had not voted since 2019. Since that time, we lost 2 teams from the AAU, but we never replaced them until all of a sudden last Thursday. And you look at who got promoted. Notre Dame is a gimme. Yep. They could have had this any time in the last 40 years. They've never wanted it. Because some of you might not know this, but to be AAU, you pay about $50 to $75 million to be part of this club. Okay, so it's not free. So you're not going to pay it unless you're going to get money back. And Notre Dame never needed it.
Is that an annual thing, or is it a one-time entrance fee, Tide?
You pay a one-time entry, but then it's annual. You make so much. So some people pay a little bit more. It's all based on numbers. Okay. I don't have all the numbers in front of me right now to tell you.
That's okay. I wasn't trying to drill down. I'm just curious because I don't know much about AAU, and I think most of our listeners don't either. So anything you can tell us that's an actual detail, we absolutely would love to hear it from you.
Right, and I make fun of my Iowa State friend. They got kicked out 3 years ago.
Okay.
But the AAU really didn't benefit them a whole lot because they're an agricultural school, and there are some agricultures on AAU, but AAU is more geared for medical. Okay, that's your medical side. But what was cool about the AAU and who they added, Miami was not a top 6 school.
Right.
Okay, they leapfrogged Florida State. So that kind of give Florida State the finger that they're probably not getting into the Big Ten, or the Big Ten would have pushed this because, again, USC is the leader of the AAU right now. And in second place is the Illinois. Okay. So you had two of the Big Ten on there. So if they wanted Florida State with their votes, they would have got Florida State. They didn't.
Okay.
Okay, so that tells me Notre Dame and Miami are the two going to go to the Big Ten.
Yeah, I can see that.
But what he did tell me is, and I want to discuss this with you a minute, also is the third team on the list that was really relevant was Arizona State.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Now, we said all along that if you want to keep Arizona State in the Pac-12, and trust me, anybody who knows Arizona State, they care 100 times more about academics than they do about sports. They make a lot more money being in the Pac-12 academically than they'll ever make in sports. And so if you want to keep Arizona State, you had to give them AAU.
I heard that, yeah.
Well, guess what? They got AAU last Thursday.
Right. So you think you believe in the theory that, and I've heard this, that Arizona State has basically been bribed to stay true in the Pac-12.
In the Pac because of the AAU thing?
That's what I've read. Is that what you're saying, Ty?
Yeah. And
okay.
And I can show you the article. I can send it to you. There was an article. It was funny. It was just done in January. The president of Arizona State listed the 3 most important sports accomplishments of last year. And you know what the number 1 sports accomplishment was?
I have no idea.
For the first time ever, they beat Stanford academically.
You're talking about Arizona State.
Nothing to do with sports.
You're talking about ASU?
ASU had beat them in an academical stat, and that was the most important to them. And that's Dr. Crow. I mean, Dr. Crow cares about academics.
Of course.
Okay, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
As a diehard Ute fan, I want to see the Utes succeed, in the long term. What would you say about this current contract situation that's going on with the Pac? And would you be concerned with any visibility or exposure issues for a team like Utah that doesn't really get on, main channel every week and stuff, and we have to kind of fight for anything? What would you say? What would you say to the exposure piece of this and stuff to alleviate a concern?
Okay, one of the problems with Utah is you're going to have with your president. I don't know how much you know about Utah, but do you know that since Utah joined the Pac-12, Utah now makes $250 million a year more in research by being tied with the Pac-12. Did you know that?
I know that the research budget, increased quite a bit. It was trending up before the Pac.
So let me get in front of this a little bit. Let's try to button this up because we have limited time. Tide. Sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off. I think.
Oh no, that's fine.
I think we need to do a show on AAU. And the reason is because I think there is a lot of rumor mongering that goes with it. I also believe that there's bullying. It's a country club. People, you get voted in, as you already said. ISU was voted out.
It's a snob fest.
So we need to have a discussion because at the end of the day, Utah aspires to be, let's just say here, right, on this list. And BYU doesn't really care. That's the thing. Is that's why BYU will never be in that club. They don't care about any of that. But the status is something that a lot of people, especially Pac-12 supporters, have used that academic research lever to say this is the one thing that will keep the conference together. And I think that the one thing that is counter to that is, but that goes against everything else that people know. It's like 10% and everybody else knows that there's 90% that really matters. So at the end of the day, in your opinion, do you think anybody leaves the Pac-12 and goes to the Big 12?
It's not going to happen this month. I'll tell you that right now. Colorado's meeting tomorrow has nothing to do with leaving the Pac-12. It has to do with the grant of rights because the wording that they used is the exact same wording that Oregon State, Washington State, and Arizona State have used in their meetings that are coming up this month. Word for word. Now, to answer his question, though, Utah, the only person or the only people who are putting a deadline on the contract needs to be done here. It needs to be. There is no timeline. They got another year. The Pac-12 presidents and are not worried about it. They want to get it done before the football season. So they still technically have 2 months. But think about this. The Big 12 hurt themselves by making all the teams sign a 99-year agreement. So if you're Utah, if you're Oregon, if you're Washington, do you want to go over to the Big 12, sign your life away, and not have a chance to get out to go to the Big Ten?
But that's not true, though, Ty. They let Oklahoma State and Texas, they got out, they paid their fee, and they're gone.
Right.
So it's not a death sentence.
Well, it's not.
I think that's an alternate.
A lot of money to get out.
Okay, but it's look, we're talking billions of dollars here with these contracts, and schools are going to in the Big 12 are going to make, or sorry, Big 10 and SEC are going to make double what everybody else is going to make. Those economics are going to drive everything. So I realize the AAU has a status. I also believe that there's other coalitions and collectives that make a difference too. But we're talking about sports and athletic departments here. And right. I don't know. I'm not saying you're right or wrong. Some of the stuff you've said, I kind of agree with. There's other stuff that I've heard from other people, and it kind of the concern that I have with the conversation is that it's dominated. And we start off talking about BYU and Utah. Next thing you know, you have people coming in from the out saying, but wait a second, this is really where Utah needs to be. And that's right. Where I wish Utah took control of its own destiny a little bit more.
But let me ask you this question then, and this will answer your question for you. You say that you can buy your way out, and that's 100% true. Texas
right.
knows you did it. But if it was that easy, we know Florida State wants out, right?
Yeah, but theirs is different. Theirs isn't the same as the Big 12's.
It's $120 million to get out.
Well, no, that's only one fee. They could actually be doubled because they sign away their home rights.
Right. No, it's $120 million, which is the same as your 99-year contract, which is $50 million. So it's $70 million more, and then you got the grant of rights on top of that. Which
right.
Is
right.
But the grant of rights, which people don't understand, is ESPN will let them out of that grant of rights because they got to pay ESPN that money, because the grant of rights is for the television company. It's not for the schools.
Right.
The exit fee is for the schools.
Right.
So Florida State, if they had a home, and I don't think they have a home right now. You guys can discuss this later. I don't think they have a home right now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
They're not in the top two of either the SEC or the Big Ten. So does Utah want to run the risk of signing away their rights and have to pay $50 million to get out of it and their grant of rights? That's something I don't know. I can't tell you for a fact, but that's part of the problem. That's why all these schools want to wait until we got to know what the contract is.
How long do you wait? If the numbers were good, let's just be realistic. If the numbers were good, we wouldn't even be having this show.
Okay, but let me ask you, we wouldn't be talking about this. If Utah makes $10 million less than the Big Ten, do you think they should go?
I don't think it has anything to do with the money.
What if they have the same? What if they make $10 million less and the streaming is about half, so they still get the same eyeballs in that?
Well, maybe.
Do you think 10 million is enough for them to come over to the Big 12?
No, not for 10 million.
I don't think 10. I think Phillips already said it. He's already said it's exposure.
It's exposure, but
it's not the money. We get caught up in the, there's charts and graphs and other things that people bring up, and they're very colorful, and there's some stats on there and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's exposure. I mean, all of us. Do any of you disagree that exposure is the most important thing we're talking about here? Do you think it's the money, or do you think it's exposure?
I would give 50-50 money, and some of the money does matter. I mean, you can't lose a great deal, but exposure is important, because if you're a recruit, the money don't matter.
You want to be on TV. You want your friends to be able to watch you and stuff. But I don't think it's people watching on their phone, though. That's one of the arguments.
Exposure is long-term. Exposure is long-term investment, whereas money is today, right? Like you can invest today, whereas like you're investing in the future.
And that's what I'm saying. Utah, I think, should be proactive, and they could take charge of their own destiny instead of waiting and following, which to everybody else kind of looks like they're following like puppies.
But the Pac-12 on the AAU soon here. we've got 5 more minutes and stuff. So let's.
Hey, I'll let you go. I just
That's fine. No, I appreciate the conversation, Ty. I really appreciate your opinion, and
I think that it warrants a really deep discussion and exploration on the AAU thing, because that is.
Yeah, we can have a show on that
for a year straight and stuff, and I would love to have a conversation about that as this whole topic.
If I'm going to have another show,
you let me know. I'll be happy to come up. You tell me what you want to discuss. I'll be happy to, talk to you about the AAU, talk to you about money, whatever you want. I'll be more than happy to.
Okay, we'll stay in contact, Tide. Okay.
All right. Hey guys, have a great night.
Thanks for coming. You bet.
Bye.
So that is a conversation. I don't want to ignore it, but you're right. We don't have a ton of time. So I want to give, hey, JT, let's wrap this up with where you want Utah to be, and then where you want your show and the interactive part of you interacting with Utah fans, where you want to see that in the next, let's say, 5 years.
I would like for Utah to stay in the Pac-12 personally. Okay. And then, look, I know what Tide was just discussing about, the rights and everything and getting signed over and all that stuff. And there's a lot there too. But I'll also go back to what I said. There are multiple outlets and sites of major portions that did predict, hey, if we get into super conferences, Utah would be included in those things. They also talked about some of the other schools. Now I'll also say, I don't know who wrote those sites and those papers, so maybe they didn't factor in some of that stuff. So that's where Tide could be right, but also that's where I think Utah and those other schools do have a chance to get into super conference, whether it's 50, 70, even more than that, because I know the media rights deals hold some of that stuff up. I feel like those can get shredded, and there's different ways to get out of it. And I know we've talked about some of the buyouts and things like that. So, but you asked where I would like Utah to be. I would like Utah State in the Pac-12. I'd like for them to add San Diego State and SMU. And honestly, I'd like to reassess and see where we are in 4 years. Now the question is, will the money come out? How will all that shake out? That's what I'm very interested to watch for and see. But it's been a lot of fun joining you guys. You guys can check me out at Locked On Utes or at JT Wistrcill on Twitter. And look, this is a conversation that's not going to go away. As Tide mentioned, right? They could wait a whole nother year to drag this out and everything too. So I hope they don't do that, but that's what we'll be watching to see for.
Ute, what do you got to follow up with that? Because I think you guys are aligned in a lot of the ways that you're thinking.
I think so. I think
there's some differences though too, right?
Right, and for me, it's really Utah's not going to be the first one to jump, and we've kind of already established that. It might be a little Pollyannish, but my viewpoint, the hope that the Big Ten will come calling, right? Mm-hmm. That's really how I see it. If there is a domino effect, though, you've got to go to the Big 12. And but in a perfect world, LA is still around, and the Pac is still around, and the Pac that we came and we love and stuff. We're still playing USC at home, but that's just not how it is. I'm kind of curious, even if the Pac were to sign a deal, this current iteration, what would that even be like without the LA schools?
Rumors were a 4-year deal when we last.
Yeah, I think 4 or 5 with $25 million is the best I've heard.
And
again, I don't think it's the money. I don't think we're getting caught up on the money.
And Patrick, it is wishful thinking in a lot of ways. I don't think it's overly realistic.
I just want to add, it's not, once again, Utah to the Big 12 is not a done deal. And as far as we know, look, it might be the best thing. There is definitely a chance it might not be the best thing too. So that's where we're, just because we're not involved in those rooms and those discussions, we can only talk about what's been reported too. And it may be the best thing for them to go to the Big 12, but there's definitely a world where the best thing for them is to stay in the Pac-12 and see how everything plays out, because we still got to wait on the media rights deal.
Yeah, and the Pac-12. You've won it 2 years in a row. The teams. The recruiting grounds. You've established success. So there's a lot of benefits if the money comes in, the exposure's there.
Yeah. And I believe TJ said that earlier, or JT, sorry. He said, and he wanted to know on the assessment kind of where Utah could be best served. And I agree that in the Pac-12, if they could keep the current iteration, I think it would be fine. But I think the exposure thing is the thing that really is hard for people to put a value on. When you talk to people that have a lot of data, they can use that data to cover up the some of the simplest facts. And let's just break those down really quick. The demographics for Utah and BYU are not great in Utah. There's not enough people here. There's not enough eyeballs, not enough people that are active that brings enough value for Utah to be graded higher than any of the schools that we talked about earlier. What they are doing is they're successful, and the organization and the school and the coaches have been great. And you can just keep doing that and be okay. But the concern is, at what point do you sort of nod your head, say, wow, we did our best effort and let's go? If it's just waiting for the contract, Klavkov's going to stretch that out until next year. And I just can't see you guys as organizations being okay with that.
Yeah, you're right. They probably wouldn't be okay with it stretching out that long. So you're right. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for being here, JT.
Mhm.
This has been fantastic. We could do this another 2 hours, I think, but I think Ute has kids he's got to take care of. So what we'll do is we'll have this show again. And would you like to be involved in that AAU conversation?
Yeah, we can try to make something work out. Yeah, just hit me guys up on the schedule, and we can try to figure it out.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, I want to thank everybody for subbing and coming in. Please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, suggestions. We take all those things. And I'm really thankful. We've went over 40 people watching live, which is a pretty good number for us. And we're just growing. So we really appreciate all the tips. And your comments are very important. We just don't have time to read them all. So you want to say anything else? Or JT, you want to say anything else before we go?
Let's continue the discussion on Twitter. Follow me at the Wild Ute, and we'll bounce back ideas back and forth, and we'll get to this thing, and we're going to really get deep. I love Twitter. That's where the ideas come.
Right, and there's value there. It's not. Yeah, I think there's a lot of value. Fans are active, and we didn't get to talk about some of the groups, OSU and Washington State. I want them to have a home. I want the Four Corners to be in the same conference. I mean, these are good things. None of those things are bad. They're just different options. And I really respect Utah. That's why we do this show. Locked On Utes. Everybody follow JT. He's a great follower on social media, and he has his own show. Do you have a standard show you do every day?
Yeah, Locked On Utes is Monday through Friday.
At what time?
Just podcast goes up it's podcast and YouTube, so it goes up at 7 every morning on YouTube, and then whenever you get up, the podcast will be available in your feed. We usually have that set for 3 a.m. So even for your early risers.
so their podcasts are not live.
Yes, they're not live.
Okay. All right, fantastic. And we're always live, and we make stupid mistakes and say silly things. But Ute and I really appreciate everybody participating in the Holy Rival Show tonight. And we'll look for a show maybe in the next couple of days, depending on what happens with the Board of Regents in Arizona and Colorado.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's check out. Everybody, have a great night. Peace.